It's December. My favorite month of the year is upon us. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be illustrating some winter greenery. I'll show you how I design and paint a lovely winter wreath in watercolor, and I have some free coloring pages to share with you. So today's video is kind of special because you can follow along with the tutorial and illustrate and paint your own wreath, or you can head over to my blog, the link's in the description, and you can grab these coloring pages. They're free, you can download and print them, and you can paint along with me using my designs. I've also released my Christmas card design from this year as a coloring page, so you can color your own Christmas cards and send them out. I hope you'll enjoy these printables. Now let's get started. So part of what we're going to do in today's tutorial is also talk about illustrating some different types of winter greenery because we are doing this wreath. So we're going to change it up. We're going to start with the illustration on the calendar page. So you can see I've got mine there on tracing paper, and then I have some watercolor paper as well that I'll transfer these images onto. And then of course I've done my calendar number grid on graph paper, transferred that onto some tracing paper, and everything is sort of ready to be transferred onto my large piece of watercolor paper. So let's talk about the illustration itself. I've got my graph paper here, and I'm going to sort of show you how I do it. I always start by just doing a big circle on the paper and sort of getting the wreath to be the size that I want. That done, I often start by just drawing a few little pairs of leaves, maybe a couple buds along the length of the circle, but pretty soon I need to start thinking about what type of greenery do I actually want to draw. And since this is a winter wreath, I'm thinking, well, what types of greenery are around right now? So let's talk about a few. First of all, we've got holly, very Christmassy. I always start with the shape of a leaf, and then you do sort of these scallop pieces coming out of the sides, and that's what gives you that holly shaped leaf. So start with your oval leaf and then do the little scallop bits, couple berries, and it really looks like holly. You can watch me as I sort of integrate it into the wreath here and just put a few leaves and berries along the shape of that circle. Next, let's try illustrating some eucalyptus. We see a lot of eucalyptus in the winter around here. So I draw these big round leaves that sort of come to a point at the end, and they each have their own little stem that comes off the main stem. Pretty simple and straightforward to illustrate, and I'll just integrate a little sprig of eucalyptus into my wreath here as well. Next I want to try illustrating some cedar. So I always start with just a branch shape, so one line with a couple little lines coming off it, and then every line just gets all these little fingers, all these little evergreen sprigs, I guess you could say. The evergreen or cedar, it's really fun to draw. It might look sort of complicated, but it's really just all these little lines, and it integrates into a wreath really nicely. Once my wreath design is illustrated with some recognizable wintry greenery like cedar and holly, snowberries, eucalyptus, I'll do two things. I'll draw just some plain little leaves and berries for filler, and I'll also start to repeat. So I want to have a couple sprigs of holly and a couple sprigs of eucalyptus. For this particular design, I am leaving a little section of the wreath open as though it were just some branches there in the top right. And so at this point, I'm ready to start tracing my initial design. As I've said in many tutorials, I always trace over my first drawing because it allows me to extract what I do like about the illustration and change or get rid of what I don't. So if there's one sprig of eucalyptus that sort of looks a little too big, or a cedar piece has gone wonky, it's sticking out the wrong way, those are little things I can change, and I can really perfect the shape of each leaf. So I just love working through an illustration with the help of some tracing paper. And that's what you see me doing here, just extracting what I like about the design, perfecting it. And at this point, it's also a good idea to hold your design up to a mirror and make sure it looks balanced. Seeing it in reverse can really help with that. And with that already, let's talk about the word December. This is a little bit of a tricky one to write. I don't really like uppercase D's for cursive, so we'll just skip that. And then I really hate this, when one sort of curvy little letter goes to another curvy little letter, like ECE is really tricky for me. So I'm just sort of working through it. Whenever I write out a word to do some faux calligraphy, I'll just write it out a bunch of times. And what I can say is try to get a little bounce in your letters. And make sure to give each letter lots of space and make sure to give them equal spacing. Then you're just going to thicken those down strokes for that faux calligraphy look. And once we're all ready, we're going to transfer our entire design onto the watercolor paper using a bit of graphite transfer paper. So it just goes dark side down, go over the entire design with a nice sharp pencil. And that's that. This is what it looks like when the transfer paper comes up, and I just go around with the pencil and fill in any little gaps or areas that I might have missed. And then at that point, you're pretty much ready to paint. And today I'm going to be using Dr. Martin's liquid watercolors. And these are a lot like watercolors that come out of a tube, so you just place a few drops of each concentrated color onto your palette, and then you can start mixing them up. So mix in lots of water, and I'm doing a green palette of greens today, obviously, for the wreath. And so I'm going to start with a very cool green. So I've mixed lots of blue and brown and sort of purple into this green, and I've got this very dark emeraldy green. And with a piece like this, what I'll often do is I'll work with one color at a time. So I'll start by painting a few of those leaves in this dark emerald green, and then I might lighten that green up a bit and do a few lighter green leaves, and I'll just go on like that. The idea for the color palette today is sort of blues and greens. I'm going to be using some very cool greens and then some bright lime greens and some icy blues. And that's just sort of a pretty and wintry color palette that I think is going to turn out really beautifully. And for this first layer of watercolor, I'm just laying down some color, making sure to sort of fill in all of these leaves, maybe adding a little bit of detail. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish the first initial painting, and then I'm going to let it dry completely. So there, I've left it to dry. And then once it is completely dry, I'll come back in with some more watercolor. And it's at this point that I will add a lot of the detail to the piece. So you can see me adding some veining to the leaves, maybe a shadow across the bottom of the berries, just lots of little darker areas, really brings the piece to life and gives it all that detail. This style will be called wet on dry, as I'm adding more wet paint to the layer of paint that's already dried, and it gives me a lot of control to add all of the details and tiny elements that I really want to see in this piece. And I'll finish my painting today by adding some little details. Anywhere there looks to be an empty spot, I might add some little sprigs, leaves, berries, and just fill in until I think the wreath looks balanced and finished. To finish the calendar, I'm just going over those numbers with my Pigma Micron from Sakura. I'm using the 05 nib to do this, so a bit of a larger nib. And I'm going to also go over the December title just carefully. I just do this slowly, and I find it works out just fine. And I'm using the 05 nib again for this part as well. But then when I go to do the faux calligraphy, so when I'm thickening those downstrokes, it's at this point that I'll switch to a smaller nib. And that just gives me a little more control as I'm filling in those downstrokes. And that concludes our winter wreath and the December calendar page. I hope you enjoyed illustrating botanicals. I know I just love that as a subject. And I hope that you'll head over to the blog and download these coloring pages. I had a lot of fun making them, and I'm excited to release the holiday card as a coloring page. If you go to ShaydaCampbellBlog.com, you'll see the links here, and if you click on them, this is what they look like. And these are free printables. You get 2 greeting cards on one 8x11 page, so you can print those out and color them yourself or have your kids color them. Or you could even print these on watercolor paper so that you can paint along with me. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll see you next week.